The room was completely dark, not because the sun had vanished, but because humanity had not yet learned how to command the night. For thousands of years, when daylight disappeared, so did work, travel, reading, and most of daily life. Then came a simple invention, a small flame held by wax and a wick, that quietly transformed civilization. The history of the candle is not just the story of light. It is the story of religion, trade, science, industry, and the countless people who relied on a flickering flame to survive. Long before candles existed, early humans gathered around open fires. Fire offered warmth, protection from predators, and enough light to continue simple tasks after sunset. But an open fire could not easily be carried from place to place. It filled shelters with smoke, consumed large amounts of wood, and required constant attention. As civilizations grew, people searched for smaller, safer, and more portable sources of light. One of the earliest solutions was the oil lamp. Thousands of years ago, civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt carved small stone or clay bowls that held animal fat or vegetable oils. A twisted plant fiber served as the wick, drawing fuel upward until it burned. These lamps illuminated homes, temples, and workshops, but they required a steady supply of oil and careful maintenance. They solved one problem while creating another. Around 3000 BC, the ancient Egyptians developed what historians often call rushlights. Instead of wax, they soaked dried reeds in melted animal fat. These primitive torches produced light, although they burned quickly and emitted thick smoke. They were not true candles, but they introduced an important concept, combining fuel and a wick into one portable source of illumination. The Romans pushed that idea much further. By around 500 BC, craftsmen began repeatedly dipping twisted fibers into melted tallow, the rendered fat of cattle and sheep. Layer after layer built up around the wick until a recognizable candle emerged. It was simple, inexpensive, and practical. Roman soldiers carried candles during military campaigns. Travelers packed them for long journeys. Families used them to navigate their homes after sunset, while merchants extended business hours beyond daylight. Yet Roman candles had obvious flaws. Tallow melted easily in warm weather, produced thick black smoke, and filled rooms with an unpleasant smell. Burning several candles inside a small house could leave walls stained with soot. Even so, they remained the best affordable option for ordinary people across much of Europe. As the Roman Empire expanded across 3 continents, candles traveled with it. Military camps, frontier forts, ports, and growing cities all depended on artificial light. Night was no longer an absolute barrier to work or movement. Scribes copied documents after sunset, guards patrolled city walls, physicians treated patients into the evening, and families gathered around a single flickering flame. Candles also became deeply connected to religion. In temples dedicated to Roman gods, steady flames symbolized devotion and the presence of the divine. This symbolic role would only grow stronger over the centuries as new faiths spread across Europe and beyond. While tallow candles served the masses, another material was beginning to gain a remarkable reputation. Produced by honeybees to build their hives, beeswax created a flame unlike anything people had seen before. It burned brighter, lasted longer, generated very little smoke, and released a naturally sweet scent instead of the unpleasant odor of animal fat. But there was a problem. Collecting beeswax was slow, dangerous, and expensive. Vast numbers of honeycombs were needed to produce even modest amounts of wax. For ordinary families, beeswax candles were almost impossible to afford. Instead, they became symbols of wealth, power, and sacred ritual, a distinction that would shape candle history for centuries. By the early Middle Ages, beeswax candles had become far more than a luxury. Across Europe, churches and monasteries demanded them for religious ceremonies. Christian leaders believed that the pure, clean-burning flame represented spiritual purity in a way that smoky tallow never could. During important services, the glow of dozens or even hundreds of beeswax candles transformed dark stone cathedrals into spaces filled with warm, golden light. For many people, these buildings were the brightest places they would ever see. But that beauty came at an enormous cost. Producing beeswax required thousands of hard-working honeybees and careful harvesting by beekeepers. Large monasteries often maintained their own apiaries simply to supply enough wax for religious festivals and daily worship. In some regions, beeswax became so valuable that it was accepted as a form of tax or tribute. A farmer might pay part of his yearly obligations not with coins, but with blocks of precious wax. Outside church walls, however, most families had little choice but to continue using tallow candles. Their homes still filled with smoke each evening, and the unpleasant smell of burning animal fat became an ordinary part of life. Wealthy nobles might enjoy clean-burning beeswax in castles and manor houses, but ordinary villagers relied on whatever light they could afford. As medieval towns expanded, candles became essential to nearly every profession. Bakers prepared dough before sunrise. Blacksmiths finished urgent repairs after dark. Scribes copied legal documents by candlelight, while scholars in monasteries spent countless hours preserving ancient texts. Without candles, much of Europe's knowledge might never have survived from one generation to the next. Demand grew so rapidly that candle making evolved into a specialized profession. Skilled artisans known as chandlers dedicated their lives to producing reliable candles. Some repeatedly dipped long rows of hanging wicks into vats of hot tallow, building each candle layer by layer. Others poured melted wax into carefully carved molds, creating smoother, more uniform products. The work was hot, messy, and physically demanding, but experienced chandlers could produce hundreds of candles each week. By the 13th century, many European cities had established powerful guilds to regulate the candle trade. These organizations controlled who could become a candle maker, set quality standards, and protected trade secrets developed over generations. Poorly made candles that burned unevenly or dripped excessively damaged a chandler's reputation, so craftsmanship became a source of pride as well as income. Candles also shaped the rhythm of everyday life. Families measured the passing hours by watching a candle burn down. Some candles were marked with lines indicating time, allowing people to estimate meetings, prayers, or work schedules. Long before mechanical clocks became common, a simple flame often served as a household timekeeper. Meanwhile, across Asia, candle technology followed its own fascinating path. In China, craftsmen experimented with wax derived from insects and seeds, while in Japan, candle makers refined wax from the berries of the sumac tree. These regional materials burned differently from European tallow and beeswax, showing that civilizations separated by thousands of miles were independently searching for better sources of artificial light. Trade routes slowly carried new ideas between continents. Merchants exchanged spices, silk, metals, and knowledge. Techniques for improving wicks, shaping molds, and refining wax gradually spread, making candles more dependable than ever before. Yet despite centuries of improvement, one challenge remained. High-quality candles were still expensive to produce. Beeswax could never satisfy the growing demand of expanding cities, while tallow remained smoky, messy, and unpleasant. Europe needed a better material, one that combined the affordability of animal fat with the clean flame of beeswax. The answer would arrive from an unexpected source far out at sea. During the 17th and 18th centuries, whaling became one of the world's largest industries. While sailors hunted whales primarily for oil, they discovered that the head of the sperm whale contained a remarkable waxy substance called spermaceti. Unlike tallow, it burned with a bright, steady flame, produced very little smoke, resisted melting during warm weather, and lasted significantly longer. Almost overnight, spermaceti candles became the premium lighting choice for wealthy households, government buildings, libraries, and merchants. Streets, offices, and ships could remain illuminated with greater reliability than ever before. A new era of lighting had begun, but its success carried an enormous hidden cost that stretched across the oceans. The remarkable quality of spermaceti candles transformed the lighting industry, but it also intensified humanity's hunt for whales. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, whaling ships sailed from ports in New England, Britain, and elsewhere on voyages that lasted years. Crews crossed the Atlantic, rounded Cape Horn, and ventured deep into the Pacific in search of sperm whales. It was one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. Sailors hunted animals that could weigh more than 50 tons using small wooden boats and hand-thrown harpoons. A single strike from a whale's tail could destroy a boat in seconds. Storms, disease, hunger, and isolation claimed countless lives long before a crew ever returned home. Yet the rewards were enormous. Whale oil illuminated cities, lubricated machinery, and fueled economic growth, while spermaceti candles became a symbol of wealth and refinement. In elegant homes, government offices, and libraries, their bright, clean flame made reading and working at night easier than ever before. Ironically, the search for better light was pushing whale populations toward collapse. As demand increased, whales became harder to find, forcing ships to travel farther into distant oceans. The lighting industry needed another breakthrough, one that would not depend on the sea. That breakthrough arrived during the Industrial Revolution. In the mid-19th century, chemists discovered that paraffin wax, refined from petroleum and certain forms of coal, could be produced on a large scale. It burned with a clean, bright flame, created very little smoke, had almost no odor, and, most importantly, could be manufactured far more cheaply than beeswax or spermaceti. Factories quickly embraced the new material. Steam-powered machinery automated much of the candle-making process, producing thousands of nearly identical candles every day. What had once been a handcrafted product made by skilled chandlers was becoming an industrial commodity available to almost everyone. At the same time, inventors improved the candle itself. Braided cotton wicks were designed to curl into the hottest part of the flame as they burned, allowing the tip to consume itself naturally. This reduced the need to trim wicks constantly and made candles safer, brighter, and more reliable for everyday use. By the late 19th century, candles had reached their greatest level of quality just as an even more revolutionary invention appeared: electric light. When inventors such as Thomas Edison and Joseph Swan developed practical incandescent lighting systems, cities began changing almost overnight. Streets that had once depended on rows of flickering flames were illuminated by electric lamps. Factories could operate around the clock without worrying about open fire. Homes gradually replaced candle holders with light switches. For the first time in history, artificial light no longer depended on a burning flame. It might have seemed like the end of the candle's story. Instead, it became the beginning of a new chapter. Freed from the responsibility of lighting entire homes and cities, candles found new purposes. They remained essential during power outages, but they also became symbols of celebration, remembrance, peace, and comfort. Birthday cakes were crowned with tiny flames. Families gathered around candlelit dinner tables. Religious ceremonies across countless faiths continued traditions that stretched back centuries. Memorial vigils used candles to honor lives lost, while festivals around the world filled streets with thousands of glowing lights. The 20th century introduced scented candles infused with lavender, vanilla, cedarwood, citrus, and countless other fragrances. What had once been a practical necessity evolved into an object associated with relaxation and atmosphere. Today, artisans blend natural waxes such as soy, coconut, and beeswax with carefully crafted scents, while luxury candle makers create products valued as much for their design as for their light. Yet despite all this innovation, the basic principle remains almost unchanged from thousands of years ago. A wick draws melted wax upward. The heat vaporizes the fuel. The vapor burns, producing the steady flame that generations before us depended upon every single night. It is remarkable to think that such a simple object witnessed nearly every stage of civilization. Candles illuminated the scrolls of ancient scholars, guided Roman soldiers through dark camps, burned beside medieval monks preserving knowledge, shone inside royal palaces, accompanied sailors crossing unknown oceans, and lit the workshops of inventors who would eventually replace them. Few inventions have served humanity for so long, with so little change. Today we flip a switch without a second thought. Entire cities blaze with electric light visible from space, making darkness seem almost optional. But for thousands of years, every conversation after sunset, every late-night journey, every prayer, every handwritten letter, and every story shared around a table depended on a single, carefully protected flame. The candle no longer lights the world as it once did. It no longer determines when we work, travel, or sleep. Yet it has never disappeared. Instead, it survives in moments that matter most: celebrations, quiet reflection, remembrance, hope, and human connection. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the candle. It did more than push back the darkness. For thousands of years, it extended the human day, preserved knowledge, strengthened communities, inspired faith, and illuminated the path from the ancient world to the modern age, all from one small flame.